One of the marks of being part of a family is that you are willing to help each other out. You look out for each other. You try and make sure that everyone is doing okay. And at least for the people who live in your own household, if not for everyone, although hopefully for all of our family, but certainly for the people who live within our own household, we would do pretty much anything to protect and to care for our family members. Think about, even now, if you got a text or a phone call saying that one of your family members was in an accident and they needed your help right now, every single one of us would drop what we were doing and we would go to help them out. And even if they were sick for a really long time, we wouldn't give up on them. We would stick by their side because that's what families do. We support each other. We stick together. We work for each other's benefit. In our passage this morning, we are reminded that the church is supposed to be a family in and of itself, that we are members of the family of Christ, and so we should treat each other much like members of a human family would, that we are to look out for one another, we are to guide each other, we are to help each other, and to protect one another. As Dad just read, we're in Galatians chapter 6 this morning, verses 1 through 5, and hopefully you remember the context of where it is that we are looking at. We've just gotten done walking through the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, and before that, he talked about the fruit or the deeds of the sinful nature. And so Paul was drawing this contrast. He was saying, if we live according to our sinful nature, we're going to live in this way, but if we live according to the Spirit, these are the kinds of traits that should be evident in our lives. These are the traits that should be evident in the lives of Christians. He kind of continues that theme now in Galatians chapter 6, because here he is going through really what we might call the practical application part of the fruit of the Spirit. He says these fruit of the Spirit, this is all things that should be present in the lives of a believer. This now, in Galatians 6, this is how we apply this in the life of the church. And so that's what we're going to draw our attention to this morning in Galatians 6, 1 through 5. And the first thing that we see here, the first kind of command, he gives a couple different commands here. The first one is just found in verse 1, and this is what he says. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Now, the first thing that we need to see here is, again, that he addresses this to dear brothers and sisters. In other words, he's saying, you guys are my family. You are family to one another. Look out for one another. So this is where we're getting this concept of a family, that he talks about that. And we need to be clear of who this is. Who is our Christian family? The Christian family is the church as a whole. All Christians everywhere. So certainly that includes the people who are in our church today, but it includes the people in the church down the street. It includes the people in the church on the other side of the world. All Christians everywhere are part of our family, and so we should be keeping an eye out. We should be trying to help one another regardless of where we find ourselves in life. But the second thing, and the command that he really says here, is he's telling us that we should look out for one another when we are caught in sin. And it sounds like he's telling us that we should point out sin in each other's lives. And we hear that command and we go, that kind of makes me nervous. I don't feel like I should be doing that, because we don't want to offend people. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want to be seen as the person who's always got our finger pointing in people's chests. And so we say, well, I want to be obedient to God. I want to do what he's saying, but I struggle as I say that we should help people when they're in their sin. And it's even harder when we go a little further and we say, who's this addressed to? He says, you who are godly should humbly and gently help that person back onto the right path. If you're like me, you hear that description and you go, I'm not sure that I fit that description. You who are godly? Me and God, there's a big difference between my conduct and God's conduct. I don't feel like I fit that description. And I would guess that most of you feel in that same place. I would also guess that if you think that you are godly, it's probably evidence that you're not. But we find ourselves and we look at this and we say, who is this talking about? Who does Paul tell us that you who are godly are the ones who are supposed to correct others? He's not saying that we have to be perfect. Because no Christian, no person is perfect. We aren't perfect. And so we need to understand that. He is saying, however, that these are people who are demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit in their lives. In other words, these are Christians, people who want to be doing what God has told them to do. He's not talking necessarily about us having all of the right actions, that we have everything, all of our ducks in a row. But he is saying that we need to have the right attitude. We need to have a godly attitude as we try to help out our brothers and sisters when they are caught in sin. And so that's really what he's talking about here. He's talking about attitude, not necessarily about perfection in our actions. And he goes down a little bit further. Well, I guess as we think about that attitude thing, it's really easy for us to think about the wrong attitude, aren't we? We're familiar with the wrong attitude that people have in dealing with sin because this is very prevalent in the church. We see people who point out sin, with their bony little finger in their chest. They stand up and act as though they're talking down to you. There are people who view themselves as spirituality police and want to jump on any little thing that we do wrong. This is the major complaint that people have about the church, isn't it? They say, you guys like to judge other people. You like to sit in judgment and to view yourselves as more important than everybody else, as better than everybody else. You kick people when they're down. It has been said before by someone that the Christian church, the church, is the only army that shoots its own wounded. Sadly, that's true often. And that's not what Paul is telling us to do. He says that's the wrong attitude. The right attitude, the godly attitude, should be one of gentleness and humility. And so this is what he tells us that we are supposed to do. He says that we are supposed to gently and humbly help people when they are caught in sin. We are to do this not with an attitude of condemnation, but an attitude of restoration. The word that he uses in the Greek when he talks about putting them back onto the right path was a word that was used of a doctor setting a broken bone, or a word that was used of a doctor putting a dislocated joint back into place. The idea that it carries is this idea of putting them back the way that they were before. We are supposed to bring them back and make them, we might say, as good as new. That's the idea of what Paul is talking about when he says you should help out a brother who is caught in sin. We are supposed to help them not just escape the sin, but bring them back, restore them to the way that they were before it all happened. That's a very different attitude than the attitude that we often see in the church and the attitude that sometimes we see in the world. So the question is, how do we do this? Well, I think I came up with 4 steps of how we are supposed to do this that I think come from this passage. The first step is that we need to identify the problem. Before we can help someone, we have to identify the problem. Now, the struggle is we say, well, everybody sins. We all sin, and every day, if you went through and you looked at my life, there'd be a list of things, I'm sure, that you could probably jump all over me for and say, you really shouldn't be doing this. And the thing is, most of the time, we know that. We sin and we go, I realize that that's not something I should have done. And so we don't want to jump on every little sin. Nobody likes that, and we don't like it when people do it to us. But what Paul is telling us is that we need to look out for one another, and when we see a pattern of sin in the life of another believer, a pattern that is destructive, that is leading them down a path that is going to hurt them, then we have a responsibility at that point to step up and to say something and to do something. And so we aren't necessarily jumping on every little sin, but we are looking for those patterns, and when we see someone who is in danger, we should help them. Once we identify the problem, we have a choice. We can do something, or we can do nothing. The temptation for us is to do nothing, because it's easier. We have a tendency to look and we see something going on in someone's life and we go, that's dangerous. That's going to lead them down a path that they shouldn't go down, and they're going to get hurt. But we kind of say, it's really not my place to say anything. It's none of my business. It's their life. I should let them do what they want to do. If I talk to them, they'd get mad. And so what happens is that we have a tendency to just kind of take our hands off because we say, that's really the loving thing to do. I don't want to be mean or judgmental. Think about it for a second, okay? Imagine, and I've used this example before, so I'm sorry if you've heard it, but I think it fits. Imagine you're walking by your friend's house, okay? And you see your friend sitting in there, and in another part of the house, you see smoke pouring out the windows. Your friend seems to be completely oblivious to it. Now, what's your response in that situation? Do you say, I don't know what they're doing in the house. It's really none of my business. I'll just go on my merry way and leave them to their own thing. Well, I sure hope that. If my house is like that, please tell me, okay? Because I'd like to know. No, we run up there and we say, hey, I don't know if you saw this or not, but there's smoke pouring out the end of your house. There is? I think your house is on fire, because that's kind of how that works. I think your house is on fire. You should do something about it. It's not loving to walk by and say, well, I think their house is on fire, but I'll just let it burn. That's not loving. It might be easier. It might be less of an inconvenience to us, but it doesn't show love. The same thing is true in the life of a believer. If we see someone who is going down a path where they're going to get hurt, to say nothing isn't loving at all. We have a responsibility to say, I see where this is leading, and I'm concerned, and I want to stop you before you get hurt. And so the option that we should take is to do something. And we should talk to people, we should confront them, and we should help them to turn back away from what they're doing wrong. The second step, though, is that we have to examine our own hearts. We have to identify the problem. We have to notice that something is going on. We see a pattern that is dangerous. But before we do anything else, we've got to start by looking at ourselves. In Matthew 7, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about, he says, before you go and try and take the speck of sawdust out of your brother's eye, you need to deal with the log that's sticking out of your own eye. In other words, we have to examine ourselves. We have to turn that same flashlight, that same searchlight into our own souls and our own hearts to make sure that we are coming at this with the right approach. Again, Jesus isn't saying that we can't confront people about sin if we have sin in our own lives, because we always will have sin in our lives. But he is saying that we need to make sure that we have the correct attitude before we try to restore brother or sister from their sin. Because, quite frankly, it's very damaging if we approach someone about sin with the wrong attitude. If we approach people with sin by taking pleasure in their sin, and we do that sometimes. We have this competitive nature that we like seeing other people fall because it means that we have moved up in the ranks. We go, well, look at them. See, they've moved down, I've moved up. That attitude is wrong. We have to banish that attitude from our hearts. We have to banish any attitudes of superiority, any attitude of, I'm somehow better than you, any attitude of pride. And that's why Paul tells us that we should be careful not to fall into temptation ourselves. He says, make sure your heart is in the right place. And what should our heart be? Our heart should be with a desire to protect and to care for and to restore a brother or sister who has fallen into sin. It's not to condemn, it's to restore. And so we need to make sure that that's the second step that we take here, that we turn that searchlight on ourselves and make sure that our hearts are in the right place so that when we go and we talk to someone, we are doing it in a spirit of love, not in a spirit of competition, not in a spirit of superiority, but in a spirit of love. So that's the second thing. The third step is that then we should go and actually talk to the person. Notice what I said. There's an important word there. We talk to the person. We don't talk about the person. See, that's what we tend to do. We see a problem in someone else's life. We see this pattern that they're going down. And what do? We go tell everyone else, did you see what they're doing? Oh my gosh, look where they're going. That's not helpful. That's not beneficial at all. All we are doing is making it more difficult for them to actually hear what we have to say. We need to talk to the person. We need to go to them and tell them what it is that we see in their lives. And again, we've got to do this with the right attitude. We have to come humbly and gently and with a desire not to hurt the other person, but to help them. And so I think there's some principles that go with that. One, we have to go in person. Don't confront somebody in sin over a text message or, over a phone call or a letter. I don't know why you'd do that, but, don't send a letter to someone that said, hey, I noticed you've been doing this. You're going to hell. That's bad, okay? Just clearly don't do that. But go in person. Okay? One of the best ways to avoid miscommunication is for people to be able to see your face. You get a chance to kind of get a sense of someone's heart when they're standing before you. You can communicate to that person directly that I care for you, I'm concerned, and I'm not coming because I'm mad at you, I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to help. The other thing is that we need to do it privately. Nobody likes to hear that they're doing something wrong. And the only thing that we hate more than hearing that we're doing something wrong is having that pointed out in front of a whole bunch of other people. If you want to go confront someone about their sin, if you want to try and turn them away from that, go catch them one-on-one, in private, face-to-face, and talk to them. Strike the right tone. Hey, I don't mean to pry, but I've seen this pattern in your life, and it concerns me. Because I see these things that you're doing, and here's where I think it's leading, and I don't want you to get hurt. And so I feel like I need to say this because I love you. That's the kind of approach that we should take when we talk to someone else. We need to respect them. We need to show respect for their dignity while still trying to help them. And here's the general rule, okay? Try and put yourself in their shoes. If the tables were turned, how would you want someone to come and talk to you? That's a really good principle for helping us to do that in the right way. Try and put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, I want to treat them the way that I would want to be treated in this situation. And the fourth step is that we help them get back on the right path. We sometimes neglect this step because even if we somehow manage to muster up the courage to go and talk to another person and confront them about some sin that we see in their lives, we tend to stop there. But Paul's command doesn't stop. He doesn't just say confront people in sin. He says restore that person back onto the right path. We need to do the work of helping people get back on the right path. That's sometimes hard. Sometimes it lasts for a long time. Sometimes it requires us to get messy because we have to stick with people. We need to understand that so many times what happens in the church is someone falls into sin and it becomes public. And what does everybody do? They pull away. That person's now a second-class citizen in the church. We don't want to get close to them because their sin might rub off on me. Instead of trying to help them move in the right direction, we leave them and abandon them and help them to feel as though they are all alone. We need to come alongside people who are struggling with sin, people who are trying to get back on their feet. We need to help them. We need to encourage them. We need to help push them in the right direction and help them as they move forward. This is not an easy thing to do because, again, it's hard. People don't change overnight often. Sometimes it happens, but most of the time, people don't change overnight. And so it's sometimes a very long process for us to really help people get back on the right road. But I put together a list of maybe some practical examples of what this might look like. First, for someone who is dealing with an addiction, again, we would go and we would lovingly confront them. We would tell them where we see this path leading them and help them to see the destructive pattern that they are in. But we can't stop there. We have to help them as they try and break that addiction. That might mean driving them to meetings, going with them to meetings. You say, well, I don't have an addiction. Doesn't matter. Go and partner with them. Help them walk through this together. It might mean giving them different options. Say, hey, I know that normally you go and you hang out with this group of people who's going to lead you astray. Hey, come hang out with us tonight. We're going to go see a movie. We're going to do this. We're going to go out to dinner. Come hang out with us. It might mean inviting someone and giving them different options. It probably means praying for them and praying with them that God would strengthen them and help them. And it also means that if they fall, we don't give up. We don't turn away from them simply because they trip up once in their life. Say, hey, I'm here. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving forward. How about the person who struggles with gossip? That's a hard one, isn't it? It's really easy to kind of look down on someone who has an addiction, but gossip hits a lot closer to home. But how do we talk to someone who struggles with gossip? How do we help them move in the right direction? Well, I think, again, we humbly come to them and say, this is the concern that I see. Maybe it's giving some specific examples. The other day I heard you were saying this, and I couldn't help but think that, that person would be horrified if they knew what people were saying about them. Confronting people, helping them to see the way that they are hurting other people. I think within that too, it also means that we encourage people. We catch them doing things right and encourage them. Hey, I know you always used to hang out with the guys here and everybody kind of sat around and gossiped, but I noticed you stopped doing that. Good for you. That's not easy to do. Or, there's a group of people standing around talking and you notice that person walks away. Hey, good for you, man. I'm impressed that you're taking this seriously. We need to encourage one another and help each other to keep going on the right path. Another example, someone who's in an immoral relationship. And that can be any number of different things, but we see someone who's in an immoral relationship. And what we need to do is we need to lovingly confront them there too and say, I see where this is leading. I know that this doesn't seem like a bad thing, but God tells us that we shouldn't do this. And it's leading us it's going to lead you in a path that's going to get you hurt. When we live in rebellion to God, there's consequences to that. And I don't want to see you get hurt. But again, it doesn't just stop with confrontation. We have to help people move forward. For someone who's living together, part of the problem might be they say, okay, so what are we supposed to do? I don't have a place to live. Maybe you say, we got a spare room. Until you guys get things sorted out, you come live with us. Or I'll get you a place to stay. Whatever the case may be, we need to be practical in helping to offer help. Maybe they walk away from a relationship that is destructive and they say, now what do I do? Offer them support. Help them pick up the pieces and move forward. Sometimes it means that if they don't take your advice and then later on down the road they get hurt, we need to be there to help them pick up the pieces, to get back on their feet. And you know what we need to not say? We need to not say, well, I told you so. We need to show love to them and help them get back on their feet and go in the right direction. The person who's absent repeatedly from Sunday school or from worship, from youth group, or any of those kinds of things, from worshiping together with other believers, we have a responsibility in that case to reach out to our friends who might be drifting from the Lord. And so, again, a phone call. That is a situation where maybe a text message would be okay. Say, hey, I've really missed you. I'm concerned about you. I hope everything's going well. Love to see you in church, whatever it is. And then, again, it's not enough to just say, hey, you haven't been at church. What's your problem? And don't say it that way anyhow. But then, when we see them in church, go say hi. Greet them. If it's been a really long time, invite them to come sit with you because probably someone else is in their seat now, and now they don't know where to sit. That's a real problem for us, isn't it? I don't know where to sit. Come sit with me. You can come sit with our family. Until you make out your own new place, you can come sit with us. It means inviting them over, talking to them, getting to know them. Encourage them when you see them and say, hey, I'm glad you're back. I was concerned. I'm glad to see you here again. You see, there's all sorts of examples. These are just a few on a list, and I realize that it's involved. It's a long list that I just gave you, but the reason for that is because we can't just fire off and confront people and say, this is wrong. We need to help them to do what is right. That's the loving thing for us to do as Christians, is to help one another to get back on the right path. So that's the first thing that Paul tells us. The first application is that we should confront one another, we should help one another when we find each other caught in sin. And we should help each other get on the right path. But the second thing that he tells us is in verses 2 and 3. And this is what he says: share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you're only fooling yourself. You are not that important. I like Paul sometimes. He's pretty direct. All of us have, if you've lived life for any period of time, you realize that there's a lot of times where life just feels like it is overwhelming, where it feels like the weight of the world is on our shoulders and it's just crushing us down. But if you've been in that situation, you've probably found something else to be true, that sometimes just a simple act of kindness, a simple act that shows that someone cares for us, makes it feel like our load is so much lighter. It doesn't have to be something major, but just feeling like someone else sees us can make a massive difference and help us to carry on. Paul tells us that we should do that to each other. We should help each other lighten the load of life. We should carry each other's burdens. We should share the burdens that other people have. Now, this isn't saying that we should that we should become lazy because we should expect everybody else to do what we can't do or what we can do. Oh, you need to help me with my burden. That's not what he's saying. Because if you go on in verses 4 and 5, he tells us that we have a responsibility to do our own part as well. Listen to what he says in verses 4 and 5. Pay careful attention to your own work, for then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done, and you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else, for we are each responsible for our own conduct. So Paul's saying we should help one another bear each other's burdens, but we also need to keep doing what we are supposed to do. We aren't supposed to be always looking around saying, well, you should be helping me. No, we should be looking for ways to help other people. Now, why don't we do that? Why do we not help other people? I think the reason is because we feel like we are so busy ourselves that we don't have time to help other people. I've got so much on my plate, I can't take what's on your plate. It's kind of the mentality that we have. But Paul is saying that we need to look beyond ourselves and look for ways to help other people. You see, the problem is that and I don't mean to minimize the burden that any of us face, but we have a tendency to evaluate our own burdens as being far greater than everyone else's. And I think the reason for that is because somehow that makes us feel important. That we have this idea that if my life is harder than yours, I'm more important, I'm special, I'm better than you are. That's part of the reason I think that Paul tells us, he says, if you think you're too important to help someone, you're deluded. You are not that important. We need to understand, we need to look at each other and say, no, you are important enough for me to help. You've heard this conversation, I'm sure, before. We fight over whose life is harder. Okay? I mean, think about this. You've heard this conversation. Someone goes, oh, man, my back really hurts. Yeah, my back hurts too. Oh, and my neck. Oh, gosh, man, it's so bad. My back hurts so bad. I only was able to get like 6 hours of sleep last night. 6 hours of sleep? Oh, I wish I could get 6. I only ever get 4. Must be nice. Why do we do that? I mean, that conversation goes on. People, you get a couple old people together, no offense, but that can go on for hours. That we go back and forth and try and compare how hard our lives are. Why do we do that? Because we're trying to say, listen, I am important. I want you to see what I'm dealing with. But you know what happens? What we are really saying in that situation is we are so focused on trying to say, I am important. You know what we are saying to the other person? You are not. Your burden doesn't matter because mine is all that matters. Paul is telling us that we have a responsibility to try and help one another out. We've got to look beyond our own selves, look beyond the stuff that's going on in our lives. Yeah, we have to handle our own burdens. Yes, we have to do those things. I understand that we're busy. I understand we've got a lot going on. But we need to take our eyes off of ourselves and look around us. See what other people are dealing with. And look for ways that we can help to alleviate the burden. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be something really flashy. Sometimes a very simple act that just shows I see you and I care for you can tremendously lift the burden in another person's life. I've got another list of some examples of what this might look like. It might mean that for someone who has had an overwhelming medical expense or a medical event, that we help them out. Whether that's financially, whether that's by driving them to doctor's appointments or helping out with some of the other things, bringing food to the house, whatever it might be, we help out in that situation. We try and ease the burden. It might mean that for the person whose spouse left them all alone with the kids, that we try and help them out. Again, that might be financially. It might be with babysitting so that they can get some of these other things done. It might be by trying to teach them some of the things that maybe they don't know. How to handle the finances, how to do repairs around the house, how to cook for a family. Those are some really practical ways that we can offer assistance. How about the person who unexpectedly lost their job? We can support them, again, Financially, we can support them by driving them to interviews or by funneling interviews, beating the bushes, trying to find some jobs for them. Again, this is different than the person who refuses to apply for jobs at all. But for someone who's lost their job and is trying to get back on their feet, we need to try and help ease the burden while they do so. It means that we try and ease the pain of someone who is overcome with grief at the loss of a loved one. Talk to them about what they're feeling. Listen to them. Cry with them. For a lot of people, it's that quiet that is the hardest part. It's that the house is quiet when it shouldn't be. Call them, invite them over to dinner. Hang out together. Go visit them. Those are things that we can do that help to ease the load. Or maybe we can help someone whose body is failing and they're no longer able to do the things that they once did. Whether that's cleaning around the house or cooking or doing yard work or doing repairs, whatever it might be, we can find some very practical ways of doing that. For the person who doesn't have a driver's license anymore, or doesn't have a car, or has lost their driver's license for whatever reason, drive them around. Offer to take them someplace. Hey, I'm heading to Macomb. Do you need to go anywhere? Do you need to go with me? It's a really simple way for us to alleviate the burden. Again, we're not trying to teach people to be lazy, but what we are trying to say is that we need to look and we need to see what other people are dealing with. We've got to look beyond ourselves and try and help to alleviate the burden, because that's a way that we show that we love each other. And it's what families do for each other. Paul tells us that we, as Christians, are a family. And he said we ought to treat each other like families treat each other. We need to look out for one another. We need to help each other get on the right path. We need to help each other go the way that God would have us to go. Now, sometimes that means confronting each other when we go on the wrong path. When we start down a path that's going to lead us into pain and to struggle, we have to say, hey, let me help you get on the right path again, because this is going to hurt. And we need to do that lovingly, and we need to do that gently and humbly. But we need to do it. The other side of it is that we can help each other when we see the burdens that each of us are carrying. Everybody's got their burdens to carry. We can help each other carry the load together. And it's amazing the difference that it makes when we realize that we are not all alone, when we realize that someone else cares for us. And we can do that for another person. You see, that should be the overarching attitude in the church. The church should be a place where people look at us and say, they care for each other. They're looking out for one another. They want to help one another. It sometimes is hard for me because I ask that question, is that how our church looks? Depending on the day, I may answer yes or no. And what's frustrating is I can't change our church. You can't change our church. We have no control over what anyone else does. But you know what? We have control over what we do. We can choose to say, I am going to love my brothers and sisters in Christ like this. I'm going to take an interest in their lives. I'm going to care about them enough to try and help them as they walk through life. That should be the attitude that we see in the church. I want to challenge you to start doing that even today. Look around. Notice the people who are in church with you. Sometimes we don't do that. Sometimes we kind of run in and we run out and we don't even pay attention to anyone that we came in contact with. Remember that part of the reason that we're here, it's not just for me. It's not just for us that we come to church. We come to be part of a family. We are here to be ministered to, but also to minister to other people. And so we need to pay attention to the people who are around us. Get to know the people who are sitting around you. Get to know someone that maybe you've seen for a long time, you don't know them. Find out their names. It's a good start. Find out, what do you do? What's your family like? What's going on in your life? What are some things that I can be praying for you about? And then pray for them. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Take the time to actually get to know each other. Because here's my thesis. The more that we get to know each other, the more that we share together, the more we will come to love each other the way God has commanded us to. And when we love each other like that, we will find that bearing each other's burdens starts to come naturally. It's a natural outflowing out of that. We'll stop competing with each other. And instead, we will start trying to help each other as we walk the path that God has laid out before us. In short, once we get to know each other like that, we'll start treating each other like family. So let's pray together. Lord, we are grateful that you have given us a family. We're grateful that you have not made us to live life alone, but that you have created us to need each other. That you have created us to have the ability to strengthen one another in the times of weakness. Help us to do that. Help us to look beyond our own selves and to see our family members. Help us to look for ways that we can alleviate the burden in their lives, because we know that you will honor that and you will bless our family when we care for one another. So guide us in that path, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to close.